They're too powerful. They might nuke you.
So give up your gun rights. Yeah. Why even try?
They can just drop a nuke on top of Ohio. So why do you need a gun?
You're hanging out in the House of Sunny podcast, where it's always sunny, mostly because of your host, comedian and YouTuber, Sunny Lohman. Want to know what Sunny and her friends are thinking about this week? Well, here she is, Sunny Lohman.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the House of Sunny podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Doug, and we're going to talk today about the school shooting in Texas and just that kind of thing in general, gun control. We're going to do our first Objectivist Report, even though we don't have our jingle ready yet. So I think we got a lot to talk about. Hopefully everybody's talking about this. Hopefully we have some unique takes on it. We've done shows on the Second Amendment before. I'll put the link in the description of our former show. But, we're going to get into it again here. So I'm sure you all know that a crazy young man went into a school and shot a bunch of kids and a couple of teachers. And that's all over the news. And of course, the reaction of the Democrats is to knee-jerk ban guns. The reaction of the right seems to be more or less, man, stop politicizing this. That's kind of the two takes that I'm seeing. And then I watched Tucker last night. I watched Russell Brand. They've got more interesting takes about the sort of spirituality behind why this kind of thing is happening. I think Tucker is right in what he said on his show last night, that it's important to, unfortunately, it is being politicized and it is kind of political, but it's cultural. And he's just like, we need to be asking ourselves why this is happening. It's not guns, because we've had guns in this country. This is a new phenomenon. Guns are not a new phenomenon. And this attack on quote unquote American gun culture, which I know everybody has contempt for. And frankly, as an American, as a red-blooded American, Doug, and you can respond to this too, I don't care what other people think about American gun culture. I don't care that everybody thinks that that's crazy. Mind your own business. This is what we do here, and this is our inalienable right. This is how we set it up. I believe in it personally. I suppose if I didn't believe in it, I wouldn't have that attitude. But the argument, when I start hearing foreigners, I just don't understand American gun culture. Okay, I don't care that you don't get it. I don't care.
Yeah. I'm sure the Jews in Nazi Germany didn't get it either.
Right.
Until you're being herded into a concentration camp and you have no way to defend yourself.
You don't get it. But let's not wait for that. I mean, that's the whole American thing. We can talk about where this thing came from. It's not about what America is about is self-responsibility and individual rights. The end. And this is why we have guns. This to me is the basis of it, is we take responsibility for defending our own lives and families. We don't delegate that responsibility. That's our right and our responsibility. And it is a way of keeping ourselves from being ruled over like peasants. And, if you don't like it, I don't care. Don't live here. So, and I don't think it's responsible for this, because if you go online, you can see all kinds of pictures of high school and junior high kids with rifles at school in their school rifle clubs from the 60s and 70s. And we didn't have these school shootings. So come on. It's just an empty, fake argument that more guns cause more school shootings. It's not true. Something is wrong with the minds of these young men that are doing this. What is it? And how do we prevent it? Or how do we, moving a culture back to sanity and somehow saving these young men will take generations. So then the question is, how do we protect our kids, I think, from crazies? It's like where we sit today, we have the culture we have the environment we have. So I know I need to own guns in order to protect myself. It's like, I'm not I want the culture to change, and I'm working on that. And I'm trying to raise my daughter to be someone who respects freedom and individual rights, to be part of the future generations. But But in the meantime, I'm going to protect my family, for the same reason why I'm going to buy extra meat at Costco this weekend, for the coming shortages. Like you do what you have to do in the moment. So I think we need to be looking at that as well. We need to understand the causes of the psychological thing that's going on, the spiritual thing that's happening. And then we need to also protect ourselves and our kids. I mean, come on, we're Americans. Let's do it. It's the same fucking, pardon me. I get angry about this because what is going on with Americans, everybody? Get back to these. It's our problem. We need to solve problems. We are Americans, not Americans, right? COVID comes. I'm expecting we're going to find treatments. We're going to save people. And instead, we all locked down and we waited for Pfizer to send out some toxic drug. All of the treatments were squashed. All the doctors fell in line, it's like, except for a very, very courageous few, because they were all getting fired and losing their licenses if they spoke out about treatments maybe working, the ones that I won't mention. But to me, this is the problem. We need to get back to where we actually solve problems and we are innovative and we expect that. I expected that. So I don't know what's happening. Why? I guess it's because the people in control are not like that. So I think Americans are still like that. But the people who are in the political schmoozer types that are in these positions of authorities in these big corporations and in government are not like that. They are state worshipers. Their religion is the state. They expect top-down protection and answers, and rather than American sort of, minds working on the free market and figuring it out. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to show you is I want to talk about, people are talking about, or Tucker last night on his show talked about antidepressants, mental illness, these different, what's going on in our culture and spiritually that we're creating these kind of psychotic young men, lack of mental health care in terms of people being sent to institutions or institutionalized for a couple of weeks while people figure, cops don't have those resources anymore. When they come across someone who's disturbed, who they think is losing it, who might be a danger, there's really nothing they can do until the person actually hurts someone. So that seems to be a problem, is we lack tools to deter these crimes. And in this case, I guess it was well known that he was disturbed and nobody could really reach in and do anything about it. What do you say to that, Doug?
First of all, we have security guards at Walmart and Target. I mean, can we have security guards at schools? I mean, yes, there's a big, gigantic cultural problem here that we're going to talk about. But, when the fact is that there are crazy people in the world. There are 350 million people in the United States. There are crazy people in the United States. And those people have guns, they have knives, they have their van that they can plow into people.
Didn't a guy just run into people in a Christmas parade and kill some kids and injure people? I mean,
absolutely. So people, there's crazy people
are snapping and it's escalating.
I don't know that it is. We'd have to look at the stats. Like I've seen stats in the past that have actually shown some of these incidents are actually going down, and it's like it gets broadcasted through the media and it gives us the sense that this is being amplified. But let's just assume that these things obviously happen. So if you're going to put a bunch of kids and teachers into a box every day, and you're going to do, we're going to have 10,000 of these school boxes around the country operating 270 days out of the year, and there's 350 million people, there's going to be some psychos that do this shit. And so, hey man, let's have a security guard. Lock the door, pay for a security guard. Is that worth 30 grand or 50 grand a year to hire a security guard?
Until we solve these other problems, that's kind of what I'm saying. Like, let's not treat, like we got COVID. Let's treat COVID. Yeah, vaccines might be great, but let's also treat COVID. Let's figure out what we can do today. And this sort of resistance to arm teachers or put security guards. And we'll talk about it because, like that Parkland, there were cops there in security, and we're going to get into that. But we've also got a cop issue with this shooting where apparently, and we'll get into this viral video is going around about cops just standing around and parents begging to allow them to go in and save their own kids because the cops are just standing. I mean, it's
that
crazy.
Happened in Florida too.
So we'll talk about that. Yeah, that happened in Florida too.
Remember
so
that?
They're obviously getting some sort of training. Anyway, we'll get into that. So as you look around, a lot of people are talking about the causes of this. And one person who I saw a comment from that I really liked is Nick Fuentes. And this guy, I don't know anything about this guy and his following, which is, they call him Groypers. Apparently he's a white supremacist. Apparently he hates Jews. I don't believe that because I've never seen it with my own eyes. And I know how anyone who talks tough and who is quote unquote based on the right is suppressed and vilified and labeled. So I'm reserving judgment because I don't know firsthand what went on and why he has that label, if it's even valid. And I share a lot of people's comments and videos, and I don't go research their entire freaking portfolio of tweets and views before I share what I think is a relevant comment. So I just want to put that out there because I know some people are going, oh, Sonny's sharing a white supremacist. I don't think you know that he's a white supremacist. I don't think anyone that might listen to this show and is commenting knows necessarily. And if you do, please put in the comments some evidence. I'm at the point where I think I'm going to do a deep dive on this guy and see for myself how bad his Jew hatred is and how bad his white supremacy is, because I don't believe it. I'm so tired of these racist labels. I'm a white supremacist. I mean,
right. Come
on, like Black people are being called white supremacists. Like Larry Elder, who ran for governor of California, was called a Black white supremacist. So it's so meaningless at this point. Anyway, so I'm gonna play right now something he said that I thought was a really good comment about this whole thing. And all right, let's see.
By the way, while you're queuing that up, I was just going to say, Google, if you're watching this, Google like mass shooting events in the United States over time. It's not clear to me that they've increased in 30, 40, 50 years. If you define it as like shootings of 4 or more people or whatever it is. So I'm not even accepting the premise that this has actually become, a bigger problem than it was 10 or 20 or 30 or 100 years ago.
Well, I think for sure violence is up since COVID. I saw that on Tucker last night. There were some statistics about generalized
crime,
violence and
violent crimes up.
Even like principals are saying fights are up in schools. Just everybody's a little less, but so are suicides and antidepressants and
But since the 70s, crime has gone down. Like in the last year, I think violent crime rates have definitely shot up, no doubt. But
yeah,
if you take a longer term perspective on it.
Okay, so here's Nick Fuentes on the school shootings. This is just a clip.
The reason you see this rise in antisocial violence is because we have a complete breakdown of the society. Time and again, when you see these kinds of mass shooters or killers, when they're not false flags, when they're not government operations, even the foiled plots by mass shooters, what you find are mentally ill people or people that are simply socially dislocated. That's it. And in a society where there was a social fabric, where there was a real moral and social fabric, it would be a lot more difficult for these kinds of people to slip through the cracks. But in a society where parents don't talk to their kids and where there's not really a sense of broad social concern, when the institutions are impersonal and bureaucratic, when the structures are oppressive and not responsive to not just the physical needs, but the spiritual and the social needs of people, this is what begets an antisocial climate broadly, which is the catalyst, which is the fertile breeding ground for this kind of violence, for a person like this spiraling out of control in this manner. And you could take this and substitute it for any one of the episodes of mass violence or attempted mass violence, or a lot of instances of fanaticism or radicalism or extremism, any of it. So many of our problems are diagnosable from the fact that we're social creatures deprived of a real society. Social animals living in a society, but yet dislocated and disoriented and deprived of the essential things that a person needs to thrive, you know?
I mean, is that wrong?
No, 100% right.
And I'm watching this clip and I'm going, this guy is the big jerk. I almost, he seems so insightful and reasonable and empathetic to this shooter in a way. I mean, he's not saying, oh, kumbaya, let's coddle the shooters or these types of mentally ill people. But he's saying, look, you know, these people have real problems. And the reason is, you know, they're falling through the cracks because we don't have community anymore. So then I want to play for you this is AOC's comment.
I find it really interesting. You know, it's funny. It's like, I find it really interesting that people think that like spreading and discussing realities and how we heal from our country's wounds as spreading hate, when really what it is like they don't want to be reminded of the hate that exists. And if we aren't willing to confront it, it's just gonna keep growing. Talking about it is not feeding it, it's not inciting it. White supremacy is a fact. It's not just a fact. You look at FBI statistics, which underreport hate crimes, police statistics, which also even all the institutions that underreport hate crimes still has white supremacist groups as by far the leading driver of domestic terrorism in the United States. And that's with all the generosity that they get from underreporting. It's not even close. It's like the bar of white supremacist violence is like this, and then it's like all the other categories are like that.
She's making that up. I mean,
and so it's not inciting anything to talk about that. There's no what ifs here.
It's inciting.
There's no like what about Antifa
like
here? Like
and
look
tell
at
everybody
the numbers
of color that white supremacy is.
Let's look
all
at the
of
numbers.
us.
Yeah.
Accept responsibility for the reality.
Okay, so what I wanted to highlight here is I'm supposed to watch out for Nick Fuentes and never share anything and don't listen to him and because he is a white supremacist. I listen to Nick Fuentes and I get this reasonable, caring, worried kind of, you know, commentary about what is causing men to do this thing, these young men. And then this person is in Congress with a legitimate job, and her whole thing is to blame white people and quote unquote white supremacists, which we know they've labeled the entire right now as white supremacists, including Black people on the right. So how is she not the racist who is labeling everyone white and ideologically opposed to her as like violent and hateful and racist? She does what they say Nick Fuentes does. What they say he does is blame Jews and blame people of color. I hate using that word, but I'm gonna. Blacks and Mexicans and Hispanic. Apparently he just wants white people to live in a society alone as with a bunch of white people, but she is fine. And it's fine to talk about her as a reasonable person. And it's fine to like listen to her and talk about her views, even though she is doing what they accuse him of. And then when I look at his stuff, I don't see any of that. So I just want to point that out. Like AOC is a racist. She's a racist. And she's race baiting and stirring up racial hatred of white people with this post, with this video.
100%. She's inciting violence, and she's factually wrong, and she's literally inciting racial violence.
She's inciting racial violence.
And by the way, what is this Texas shoot with statistics she made up? It's not even true what she's claiming.
It's not even true.
And
it's not even true. So, she makes up statistics to rile people up. How is that not inciting violence? And how is that not just rank anti-white hate?
What does this Texas shooting have to do with white supremacy?
The dude was a freaking Hispanic, wasn't he? What? Anyway, not that it matters, but I think she's referring to the one where the guy had the manifesto and he shot a bunch of black people in was it Buffalo? The one that just happened too.
Yeah.
So what about the guy who ran over white people with his truck at the Christmas parade? I mean, for her to say it's all, I mean, she's just making it up. And the whole point is, how is she not this figure that everybody blames or points at Nick Fuentes and says, that guy is X. He has to be deplatformed, debanked, ignored, canceled. You can't even see him at CPAC. You can't see him at any right-sided event. He has to have his own events because nobody will. And the only person on the right who has stood up for him is Michelle Malcolm, who I respect a great deal. So that's why I've always been inclined to be like, I don't know. If Michelle is on his side, I got to say that gives him some credibility because I think she's a very reasonable, rational, non-racist person. So I just can't imagine her supporting somebody. I could be wrong, but anyway, it elevates him in my mind. So that's his life. He has to operate on the fringe. Everywhere he goes, he gets deplatformed and canceled and was on the no-fly list for a while. I mean, that's his life, but AOC is in Congress and she is overtly and outwardly and in everybody's face doing exactly what they accuse him of doing, which I've never seen him do. So let's stop.
Great point.
Let's stop marginalizing our own people on our side. Even if we are a little uncomfortable, I'm not even saying Nick is this guy. Let's say there are people out there, there are white separatists. I don't see a lot of white supremacists. I see a lot of white separatists. And a lot of that is coming from people because it's a backlash against all of this anti-white stuff. So I see people like that. I will still listen to what they have to say. That doesn't make them monsters. They're trying to, they believe this and they're trying to protect themselves and their families. So maybe let's listen to them. Why not? I'm not afraid of it. People are so afraid of other people's ideas as if you hear them and then you're just going to you're going to absorb it and lose your mind or something. I mean, come on. All right. So we did that. Let's see, number 5. Okay. So this is something that I saw that I want to share. This is a great thread. You can all go check it out. I'll tell you who. Okay. All right. This is Andrew Follett on Twitter. A thread about how the media is telling you 2 major lies about mass shootings and gun control. 1, other countries with vastly stricter gun laws than the U.S. have higher rates of mass shootings. And 2, U.S. jurisdictions with gun laws have exponentially higher rates of gun violence. So this thread is full of facts about that. Although events in the U.S. tend to get the lion's share of media exposure, mass shootings are a worldwide issue. So can we put it to rest with this American gun culture? The U.S. makes up about 1.15% of the world's mass shootings while having 5% of the world's population. So we don't even have mass shootings per capita that other countries have. Okay. Out of 97 countries with data, that's critical too, because a lot of the more dangerous countries don't even have data. So we're really just talking about the West.
Yeah.
Out of 97, only 97 countries had data. The US is 64th. We're in the bottom third frequency of mass shootings and 65th in murder rate. And rates of mass shootings elsewhere are rising faster than our rates. So there you go. I mean, put that in your pipe and smoke it, Euros, with your, Americans and their guns, and looking down on us. Oh my God, I hate those people. 4 times as many per capita died in mass shootings in France. 4 times as many people per capita as in the US. 21 times in Danish Norway. Did you think that? Could you have imagined that in Norway, it's 21 times higher mass shootings?
Mm-hmm.
In addition, those fairly nice nations, Finland, Germany, Israel, Italy, Spain, and Switzerland, have higher mass shooting death rates. All of those are pretty nice countries with much stricter gun control laws than the US, and all have higher per capita deaths from mass shootings than the US. So somehow these people are still getting guns, even though they've disarmed all the citizens. And I have a tendency to think it's because the citizens are disarmed that so many people die. Because here you see a lot of shooters thwarted before they're able to kill people. And also, I think there's a hesitation on the part of criminals when they think people might be armed. And I think you could argue a lot of these mass shootings take place in gun-controlled places like schools, where they don't think they're going to encounter guns, or, nobody's going to be able to fight back.
And I assume this is mass shootings from like civilians, not mass shootings from their own governments.
Right.
Which we're not even getting into.
We're not even talking about
genocide by government.
Right. Which historically is probably the biggest killer of people. I mean, who can compete with Stalin, right?
Or the Rwandan genocide, or go to Liberia, or go to anywhere.
Or Mao and I mean, come on. According to a 2018 study surveying data over an 18-year period, the US is 64th in the world in terms of mass shooting rates per capita. If anything, our policy structure is actually pretty good at preventing this by global standards, especially relative to other nice countries. The highest gun ownership state with the loosest gun laws in the country is Wyoming, where 59.7% of households have a gun. 60% of households have a gun. They're arguably the least restrictive in the United States. Wyoming does not have a gun homicide problem, with the rate of only 1.4 per 100,000, actually lower than right across the border in more gun-controlled Canada, and only about a third of that of the nation as a whole. The highest murder rate of any jurisdiction, this is hilarious, is Washington, D.C., which has a murder rate of 21.8 per 100,000. 20 times that of most European countries. So how's that skewing our statistics too? It's like the heartland is doing fine. It's these strong Democrat controlled cities where all the gun violence is happening.
100% true.
DC also has the most restrictive gun laws in the country and the lowest rates of legal gun ownership, with numbers less than in many European states. I'd say the data suggests that the factors making DC have such high gun violence rates are part of the story of why America as a whole is so deadly. But these cannot include high gun ownership or lack of gun regulation. Those aren't causes. What is going on in DC that's not going on in Wyoming? If stricter gun laws reduced gun violence rates, you'd expect jurisdictions with those laws to have lower rates of gun violence, and it's instead the opposite. Okay, so that's just a really interesting thread.
100% true. Yeah, just look at the data. I mean, every time I go through this data, it's shocking because it's the exact opposite of everything that the left and the media would tell you to do. And what's their knee-jerk reaction is when someone shoots is ban guns. Just like their reaction to everything is a school child's mentality. Of, we need money, print money. Right. Someone got shot, ban guns. This is their mentality and everything.
Mentality. And there are so many ways to kill people besides guns. So if you're really determined, I don't know. Cars seem to be really good ways to kill people. So what can we do? And I think, my daughter's school sent out a thing. I don't know if you got one from your kid's school, but they explained, like, one thing that kind of bothered me was that what they are being taught to do in schools is to hide and pretend like the classroom is empty. And I'm like, that doesn't really make sense to me, because now you're just a group of kids locked into a closet or a bathroom, kind of a group of sitting ducks. I don't feel like that's the right strategy. And I don't know who's making up these strategies and then percolating them out to the country at large, but like my kid's school bumps up against some nature. There's a state or a city controlled kind of wilderness area, and there's a gate. And I'm like, go out that gate. What is, all the kids should go out that gate and freaking disperse into the woods, because like, don't stay in a bathroom and cower and wait for the shooter to knock the door down and kill all the kids. It just, that seems wrong to me. I don't know. But the other thing, and we touched on this, we said we were going to talk about this, is let's arm the people in the school, adults that we can trust or have security. And I want to share this post about that, to your point, Doug, and to the point we were just talking about. Okay, here is a picture of a guy. He's got a smile on his face. He's confident. He's holding a big weapon. He's an American guy. He looks like an American guy, right? You got girls in the background running around. It looks like a safe place. And this is by a woman, a public post on Facebook. Her name is Lindsay Gunter. I don't know if that's a fake name or what. Sounds like maybe this is propaganda, but I'm reading it anyway, because this is what we want. My daughter attends MSA in Palmetto, Florida. This is who stands at our one entry to the school all day. Retired combat veteran, trained to head straight for gunfire, who has survived being shot at in intense situations. You may not like it, but I promise today, when I drop her off, I have a tad bit more reassurance knowing her completely gated, guarded school has him. We don't need to debate about this, she says. Look at this. This is why is this bad? This isn't scary. This is good. And I don't know, there's something going wrong with these cops who are trained in this sort of official security of these schools. Something is going wrong. There's some sort of mass training that has occurred that is making these people stand down rather than go to the shooter. This keeps happening over and over and over in these schools. It happened at Parkland. If you remember, first of all, the security guard hid. The guy on site with a gun hid, and that was proven. And he wasn't even fired for that. And then the other thing was, when the SWAT arrived, they stood outside. They didn't go in. And the guy went on for 45 minutes just shooting people, going through the school, just shooting people, and nobody went in. I feel like, how can this be happening, Doug?
Well, I think it's common for someone who's not accustomed or has been trained for combat. I mean, most police officers never fire their weapon in their career. And so if you're asking police officers to kind of come to the rescue, like, obviously we would hope that they would be courageous enough to put themselves into that situation. Certainly the SWAT team should be trained in that. But how many, you're a middle-aged cop and you got 5 years from retirement or something, you're going to run into a building. A lot of them would, but a lot of them wouldn't. So we can't depend on that. You can't assume that the police are going to come to your rescue.
But I'm suggesting that there is something more sinister afoot here, that I don't know if it's intentional, but there appears to be a universal strategy, because it's now happened several times.
You stand down.
That these SWAT teams don't go in. It just keeps happening. Why is this happening?
Part of it, I'm sure they're told they're not there to risk their own lives. I mean, they're there. They've got there's some like command, I'm speculating, but I assume there's some like command and control structure where we're only going in when we get so many people, we have backup and we have a perimeter, and so the guy that just shows up,
babies are being shot.
The guy's just going to stand there and wait for his backup or whatever, because he's not going to die for it.
So there's a video circulating right now of parents outside of this Texas school. There's cops everywhere. The parents are screaming and begging to be allowed to go into the building and save their own kids because the cops aren't going in. And they know the shooter is in there just shooting fucking kids. And the parents they're panicking and screaming and freaking out. I mean, I think I would shoot a cop who got in my way to protect my baby. I'd be like, you're going to get in my way. You're going down. But there is a video here where they actually have one of the parents on the ground. They're preventing the parents from going into the building to save their own kids, and they don't go in. They won't risk their lives, but they won't let anyone else risk their life either. And this is a viral video going around, and I am sorry. I don't know if I'm going to even play it. It is almost too hard to watch. I think I would probably cry on the show if I play it, but I just want to bring your attention to it. You can go see it at this guy's Twitter. Let's just rush in because the cops aren't doing anything like they are supposed to, said Javier Cazares, whose daughter was killed in the 40-minute school massacre. 40 minutes. This guy was in there shooting children.
God.
The footage shows armed police pinning one man to the ground, presumably a parent who tried to go in. And I'm not going to play this on the show, but I feel like what is happening, this has happened multiple times. The training these guys are getting is to not go in. Something's going on. This is a scandal. And it happened at Parkland and nothing happened. The conversation started and it was diverted to gun control so fast. Nobody was looking at what happened at the school, the security, the cops, like everything that happened that was also responsible for why that many kids died. And in this case, why this many kids died or were injured.
Sickening.
Stop talking about gun control and the Second Amendment and let's look at what happened. Why didn't these cops with their armor and their guns go in and get that guy? My God, what are they in their job for if they're not to put their body in front of a 10-year-old girl? Why are they in their job? They're in their job to risk their lives for that. This isn't, if they aren't, find people who are, because there are men who would risk their lives for a 10-year-old girl. There are. These people are following orders. They're not cowards necessarily. They're following orders. Why are the orders to stand down? I don't know what's going on here. So let's talk next about, we had talked before starting the show that you believe that there are Democrat policies. Let's talk about gun control for a second. There are Democrat policies making people buy more guns, making people arm themselves. What do you think those are? You said you had a list.
Yeah. Well, I posted just a short list on my page where I said,
do you want to share your screen? You can just read it too.
Yeah.
So you posted it at Rational Capitalist on Facebook.
Yeah. And I said, left-wing Democrat policies are precisely why we need gun rights. It's the left that threatens to outlaw free speech, confiscate and redistribute wealth, mandate medical procedures and inter dissenters, see Australia, throttle our energy independence and drive up fuel costs, release violent criminals from prison, decriminalize theft, push transgenderism and sex reassignment surgeries on grade schoolers, inculcate primary schoolers into identity political rage, pack the Supreme Court, scrap the Electoral College, debase the currency through inflation, rig elections, and flood the border with unvetted masses of immigrants. And I said, this is just the kind of lawlessness and tyranny that makes bearing arms essential to rational, law-abiding American citizens who wish to protect themselves and their families.
Yeah, and it's not just protecting against the government. It's protecting against, like, especially if you live in border Texas, protecting yourself against these criminals and lowlifes coming across the border in mass droves. I mean,
they said there were 500,000 people that came across in the last few months. I mean, there's dead bodies on ranches I mean, these people are, so not only just the border control, but then if you live in a city where the left is trying to defund the police and they're no longer enforcing shoplifting laws or theft laws, and people just walk into stores and steal, and you have crazy schizophrenic homeless people all over the street, threatening people and threatening your children as you try and walk down the street. Like, this is the reason why you need guns, is to protect yourself from this. We don't live in Mayberry.
Letting Antifa and BLM
burn
run
down
wild and riot. And, when that was going on, I was nervous, even though I live in a really quiet, out of the way place. I mean, Laguna Beach has a population of 18,000 people, and we're on the beach and nobody comes here except tourists, who want to lay on the beach. We're so far from LA, but they got all the way down to a beach community not too far north of here. And I was on guard during that time. I was on extra alert, worried that they would eventually make it down my street. So,
So the government's encouraging lawlessness by having a two-tier standard of justice where they don't enforce certain laws and they don't prosecute criminals and arsonists and violent criminals because of their political or identity group, the BLM types. But, if you're not in a preferred political group, you're at risk of being killed with impunity or being prosecuted. And so, when people start seeing that, and then the left starts threatening more gun control to prevent you from protecting yourself from this lawlessness and tyranny, what's the natural reaction? I'm going to go buy guns now. I'm going to go buy all my ammo now. Yeah. And guess what? Gun sales are through the roof and there's no ammo to even be had because, everyone's bought it. So this is the greatest gift to gun ownership ever, are these kinds of policies. But the point is that this is why we need to take responsibility. And I think most adults and rational law abiding people feel like, look, this is the last straw. Like, if you're going to, if these people come to my house or threaten me, and let's not forget, remember the hordes of these people that were going into restaurants,
yes,
and threatening people just to like sitting down at like an outdoor cafe or in a restaurant, and like 50 of these people would come in and surround them. Yeah. There's videos of homeless people pulling people out of cars and beating them.
Yeah.
Like yesterday, if you drive in the wrong neighborhood, you get surrounded by these people, and the police won't arrest them. The police won't even go into some of these places.
They don't even investigate or anything, and they're not going to come to your aid in the moment. So,
and guess what? Those policies aren't occurring in Wyoming. They're not occurring in most of these red or rural states. This is happening in big cities that have the strictest gun control laws and therefore the highest murder and violent crime rates. And they're telling their police to stand down. So this is why we need gun rights. This
whole crime statistics and suicides and overdoses and all this stuff going up since the lockdowns. That's their policy too, is to lock down young people, and they're causing a lot of mental illness.
Right. We have a generation of kids that are going to be mentally ill. But, the broader point that you made earlier about just the whole postmodern decadence and angst of our current culture, where you have a valueless, sort of empty, inane culture of postmodernism, which stresses that people can't live harmoniously together. It's power group against power group. That's the thesis of postmodernism, which is the basis of critical race theory.
So it's not like they're striving for a peaceful, organized, happy society. Their whole thing is strife.
That's what reality is. Reality is a power contest between the privileged and the oppressed. And so guess what? You're in the oppressed group, so get ready. Be an activist. You got to go put your body out on the line and go get the bad guys, the oppressors. And this is what's being taught. It's no longer being taught that, hey, we got to live harmoniously together and we're going to respect everybody's rights and we're going to trade and interact and speak freely and debate issues. And like live happily ever after. No, the white people are trying to oppress you. The white
that's AOC's
or
response. It's
not
like
just white people, the patriarchy.
There's a mass shooting where a disturbed, mentally ill Hispanic boy shot a bunch of children and teachers, and AOC blames white supremacy.
Right.
So now to end the show, we're going to have our first Objectivist Report, which overwhelmingly, Doug, when we asked the question a few weeks ago, do you guys want to hear about objectivists that say ridiculous things? And overwhelmingly people do, including people who aren't objectivists because they really liked our former episode, which I'll also put in the description, where we took an article that Harry Binswanger wrote about vaccines and we kind of picked it apart. And I guess that was universally enjoyed by people who just care about these types of newsy things. So it doesn't really matter who the players are, but to objectivists, I think it matters. And I think part of the problem that I see with objectivists is they don't really know what the leaders of objectivism are even saying. And they're kind of going on this sort of very vague understanding of who these people are and what they're actually saying, because they're not really writing their crap down very much. And particularly the guy we're going to cover right now is Yaron Brook, who never writes anything down. So you have to actually listen to hours of him talking to see what he's doing. And nobody has time for that. So anyway, this is from a Q&A from a long time ago where he addressed the question about the Second Amendment. And so we're going to do our first Objectivist Report and see what the number one objectivist in the country, the chairman of the Ayn Rand Institute, formerly the CEO for 20 years, who packed his little organization with people who are like him. What is he saying about the Second Amendment? And I'm going to try really hard not to be personally insulting, because let's just look at the ideas. That's all we need to do, right? You'll see. All right. He was asked, what do you think? Let's see are you getting this on your full screen?
Yeah, I see it full screen.
Okay. What do you think about gun rights and the Second Amendment? And not that it has to matter. There are plenty of immigrants who become and appreciate America, who become real Americans and appreciate our culture, who we are, this sort of cowboy culture, this cowboy mentality, this rugged individualism, self-responsibility. And then there are people, globalists like Yaron Brook, who is, I've said this before on a show, I'm going to say it again. This guy does not get Americans, and he's not very impressed with Americans. What do you think about gun rights and the Second Amendment? He's asked.
I mean, Second Amendment is a complex issue, partially because
No, it's not. Is it? I guess they're all very abstract. But do you remember Ayn Rand warned against people who said, oh, this is very complicated, right? Wasn't that like a primary thing she used to make fun of people who economics is too complicated? It's not simple like free markets.
Yeah,
it's too
especially
complicated.
if you use it to obfuscate. Yeah, definitely.
intention of the Second Amendment is clearly to allow the population to be armed so that it can rebel against government.
Is that the intention of the Second Amendment? Is it
Part of it.
clearly to overthrow the government?
To protect against or defend against the government?
Is that the only reason?
No, but that was a big part of it.
But in a world in which governments have big weapons, including nukes, it's meaningless to say, I have a right to have a little handgun because I'm going to rebel against the government. I mean,
What do you think of that? They're too powerful. They might nuke you.
So give up your gun rights. Yeah. Why even try?
They can
They're
just
gonna
drop a nuke on top
on
of
you.
Ohio. So why do you need a gun?
it just doesn't make any sense, right? You're not going to rebel against the government. It's not the intention of most people who have guns to rebel. And if you did, you'd be slaughtered.
I don't think it is the intention of most people to rebel. I don't think that anybody wants to shoot their gun. You know, a responsible citizen isn't like, I can't wait to get into a gunfight with the United States. right?
Right.
But that's not the point. Like, you don't get guns because you just can't wait to fight your
Well,
own brothers in arms in the country.
And is the idea that there's like one lone guy, somewhere in Arkansas that has a gun that's going to fight the Marine Corps? I mean, no, you're talking about tens of millions of gun owners. So if there was a unified sort of assault on American cities coming from wherever, the government or some other force, they'd have to go door to door in every neighborhood in this fucking country. And listen, if you're in a military, do you want to sign up for that?
You know what? And
I don't care if I don't have a nuke.
Everybody in the military talks about how difficult it is to fight on the street and guerrilla warfare. I mean, it's so difficult. And
you just couldn't take over.
I'm wondering if there is an example in history where the people rebelling against tyranny were more powerful than the tyrant, where you looked at it and you said, oh, look at those people. They're the ones with the nukes. They're the ones with the big weapons. That tyrant has nothing.
How about the North Vietnamese? How about the Afghan rebels in caves fighting like over the last 20 years? They won.
I mean, right?
They just kicked our
Who's
ass.
running Afghanistan right now is what I want to know.
I think the Taliban did pretty good.
And if Yaron were around at the American Revolution, can you just imagine, like, well, the British, I mean, they own the seas. They have all the cannons. They're the ones with the big weapons. What are you guys talking about? You're farmers.
When the British Navy came into New York Harbor, they were literally the biggest armada that had ever been assembled in human history. And there were like a few thousand farmers with muskets.
The Sons of Liberty would stop inviting him to their meetings because they'd be like, man, that guy's negative.
Yeah.
Dude, we don't want your own around. He's such a Debbie Downer. We're trying to like motivate ourselves and feel, empowered. And this guy's like, you can't win. Are you really going to fight? Nobody really wants to fight.
Unbelievable.
And you'd be crushed. So
you'd be crushed.
Now, I think you have a right to bear arms in a sense of self-defense. So in the emergency where the police can't get to you in time, you should be able to defend yourself, and you should be allowed to have the weapon.
You should be allowed.
Be allowed.
You should be allowed to protect yourself because the cops might take 20 minutes to get to your house. So you should be allowed to have a gun for that.
Yeah, the government bestows a privilege upon you to allow you to own a gun.
That makes a little bit of a sense. You can be allowed to have a gun for that. Like this, to me, he's approaching this from the completely wrong. This is another example of the current objectivist intellectual thought leadership having the exact backwards epistemology, or just like, he's all like in the weeds on this, and he's not.
It's not inductive.
Yeah.
He's not starting with facts and history and context. He's deducing down from a principle.
Yeah.
And then it comes through.
Yeah. And his principle is not individualism and self-responsibility. It's not
necessary for that emergency in order to protect yourself. Okay, but then what are those guns? And how big can they be?
Now we're going to have a government committee to decide what are the guns, how big may they be. And so California's law about not having like a big clip for your gun makes sense because you don't want to have too many bullets. You only need 9 rounds, I guess. What is the limit in California? You only need 6 rounds to shoot a burglar.
Well, like Joe Biden said, deer aren't wearing Kevlar. Deer
don't wear Kevlar. You don't need a rifle.
And all of that is I think, an interesting legal question. And I don't think
an interesting legal question. What does that mean? And that is a question to be resolved by legal people and people above you, the elites, who will decide how big your guns can be, and then they will let you know what you are allowed. This is Yaron's approach to the Second Amendment.
Objectivism has a clear answer on that. I mean, I have my opinions. I know a lot of objectivists who disagree with me on it, because I think it's something for legal scholars to really think about and analyze and come up with an answer. Where's the line? I don't think you can have a tank. It's okay to have a handgun. AK-47, automatic, semi-automatic, doesn't make a difference. Who cares? Should you have it at all? Should you register with the government? I think you should. I think the government should have a registry of all the
Gun registration. All guns should be registered.
Wow.
That's
Interesting.
the objectivist take on the Second Amendment. This guy is not for the Second Amendment at all.
No. Well, he's anti-American.
because I think it's
This
part
isn't
of
an-
its monopoly over the use of over the retaliatory use of force.
So he is rationalizing this position from an objectivist, I guess, idea that you transfer a little bit of your right to self-defense to the government. You give a monopoly on force to the government. I don't even agree with that. I don't think that's true. Like if you give cops the right to arrest people and use force against criminals, that doesn't mean that you're abrogating your own right to protect yourself. So nobody really has a monopoly on that. I don't really see that. I'm not really sure of the language, and I didn't look up the Ayn Rand quote. But let's just say what you are doing, you are saying, okay, government, I'm allowing you to use force in this limited way to protect me and my family and our country with the military. So I believe that's part of Ayn Rand's explicit philosophy of what a government has a right to do.
Yeah. And if she said, which she probably did, and if she meant that the government has a monopoly on the use of force, and that means as a citizen, you don't have the right to defend yourself, then she's absolutely wrong.
She would be wrong.
And so,
but I don't think that's
there's
what
no way
she
she
said.
believed that, of course.
And
so this
yeah.
idea that the government has a monopoly on the use of force, and then they grant you a privilege to maybe use a weapon in an emergency case before the police can get there. I completely reject that argument. I mean, you have responsibility for yourself. The natural order, natural rights are that you are responsible for your person and your individual person and your family. And so you have a right to defend yourself. Now, I do agree that there are legal prescriptions that, the state would have, and, in these cases that, like conceal and carry laws and stuff like that. Like, can I just run in to somewhere and start shooting people alongside the police? Because no, so yes, that extent,
sort of anti-vigilantism to keep law and order. Right.
But the premise, and again, he should be speaking more philosophically and more broadly about this, which is like, where does these rights come from? They come from your nature. You have a right to protect yourself. And yes, it's true that if we form a society, we delegate some power to the government to protect us from foreign invaders, because I can't personally fight China. But, if we get 50 states together to protect us against China, then, that's a smart thing to do. But that's all tactics. Like, that's how let's create a government. Let's give them some very limited powers to help defend us, because it makes sense to protect ourselves and protect us from criminals. But like, philosophically, the responsibility rests on the individual.
Yeah. And if I'm using the word allow, I'm actually using that as I'm allowing the government to form a military, that's.
Yeah. They're not allowing me. We're allowing them.
It's completely the other way. And so he's rationalizing his whole position that, well, we've delegated this responsibility to government, and therefore we have to do what they say.
Keep track of weapons of force. The only reason
that's why they're allowed to
is
keep track of weapons of force, because we've delegated force to them as a monopoly. So this is either a really big misunderstanding of what Ayn Rand meant about this, or Ayn Rand was wrong, and this is not an American viewpoint. This is not a viewpoint consistent with the idea that you have responsibility and you have a right to protect your own life.
people. Yeah, but to kill people, right? To kill people for protection, right? But it's to kill people. So it's about violence. The essence of guns is violence. And therefore, since the government is responsible for all things violent.
Okay, that is wrong, right?
Yeah.
The government is responsible for all things violent. That's one of his premises that he just sort of pops in there.
should monitor what's being, who owns the guns. Now, if you accept the Second Amendment as allowing you to hold guns in order to rebel against the government, well, of course you don't want the government to register the guns, because the whole purpose of accumulating.
So right there, he's saying he rejects the idea that people should own guns to protect them against tyranny, which is a fundamental reason why the Second Amendment is there. He is saying, well, but if you agree with that, then of course you don't like the registry. So he's already said, I don't agree with that. I support a registry. So he's disconnecting gun ownership from the right of people to protect themselves against tyranny.
Right. It's a logical contradiction here, because he's saying the whole reason you wouldn't want the government to know is because you want to protect yourself from government tyranny.
Yeah.
But he supports the registry. So the inference is that
but he also said earlier,
you should have the right to protect yourself from the government.
The reason he said earlier, which is not his real reason. Well, you can't do anything anyway because you're just this little guy with you just have a musket. I mean, come on.
The guns to fight them. But I don't believe that anymore. I don't believe it's viable in a modern society to rebel against the government using guns. So,
wow. Okay.
Aren't guns like car insurance? You hope you never have to use it.
I can't use it. What does it mean to rebel against the American government? It means to die. It's not like the founding fathers. It's not like 100 years ago. There's no,
Does anyone think 200 years ago, Yaron would have a different opinion? It's not like when
have a
British,
spoon-skin cap on.
Think about what it was like for our founders. The British, you're going to fight the freaking King of England, and you're like these scrappy farmers with they didn't even have shoes 2 years into the war. And I mean, he would be the same Debbie Downer. Oh, it can't be done. But really, fundamentally, I don't think he likes the idea. I think this is an excuse. I think he doesn't like the idea that people who maybe don't agree, who are these sort of peasants, have guns.
There's no victory here, right?
So because Yaron's crystal ball says you can't win, therefore you shouldn't, this whole idea that you might protect yourself against tyranny is just out. We'll just throw that out because I can't see it. That is the most unphilosophical take, right?
And you shouldn't be able to even die trying. Like if our government was this tyrannical.
Oh, right. Such a good point.
And people are coming to get you. Why wouldn't you just say, you know what? I'd rather die in a blaze of glory fighting against the Nazi
against this tyranny for my kids, man. I'm willing to be a martyr or, die trying. Why wouldn't we try?
And the point, my previous point, which I want to reiterate, is just that the fact of tens of millions of people owning guns is a deterrent.
It is a deterrent
to the government assaulting us.
Why else are they trying so hard to disarm us?
I mean, if 0 people own guns, Germany, Chinese, anywhere where there's tyranny right now, look at their gun ownership laws.
Just look how hard the Democrats are fighting for this. This matters. It matters that we're armed. And so, yes, it matters that we're armed. Look at them. They're afraid of us. Number 2, we could win. And in history, I mean, especially given that rank and file soldiers are not interested in this Democrat elite. So, I mean, please, you think the military would remain on the side of who's that general who likes transgender people in the military? I mean, that guy would be the first one with his throat cut.
And go up your AK-47. Have you ever seen a tank? You know what a tank will do to you? I mean, never mind the nuke. I mean, they have big weapons that the founding fathers.
So then we should own tanks. Some people do own tanks. You can buy a tank.
A comment on this. So Yaron's history is, so he's Israeli. He spent 2 years conscripted, and everybody who's Israeli has to go 2 years in the military. It's part of being a citizen. And he was in quote unquote intelligence. So I think that they met him and they said, put that guy behind a desk where he can't do any harm. Oh my God, the guy's a pussy.
Ireland and even like a small.
I'm from Ireland. A small force overthrow the British government.
Yeah, only because the British government wouldn't wipe you out, but they could have defeated you at any moment, right? Believe me, as a former Israeli military intelligence guy, they could have crushed you. Now, a lot.
Can you believe this guy?
This is his argument?
Yeah.
They couldn't win. They're more
Israeli
powerful than
military
you.
intelligence guy. By the way, he was 18. He wasn't like 40 when he was an Israeli intelligence guy. So this guy was like crunching databases or, who knows, but he was sitting at a desk doing grunt work at 18 in the Israeli military. And that's supposed to be impressive. So he can now speak as an expert about whether or not the British government could have crushed the Irish rebellion. He's got no footing, no basis, no proof. He doesn't even bring anything up to back up this claim. He just throws out that the British government could have crushed a very, very angry populace in Ireland trying to overthrow the crown. And maybe part of the reason that the Irish did win their independence is that the British government didn't have the motivation. The people of Britain were like, why are we fighting these people? Just let them have their independence.
It's an impediment. Even if it's not, I mean, what do you have to do? Prove that, you have like a nuclear arsenal and like you literally have the power of the Chinese military in order to justify us having weapons? That's ridiculous. Of course,
you can ruin the morale of your enemy. That's more powerful. That's part of warfare, is to destroy the morale of the people that you're fighting.
And it's a gigantic impediment.
Yes.
To even them starting
They decided
something.
not to crush you, but they could have crushed you.
They decided not to crush you.
They would have had to kill a lot of you, not just a few, a lot, right? But they could have taken Belfast and flattened it, and the IRA would have disappeared. But so yes, in that sense, you can rebel, but that's not a revolution, right? A revolution is armed revolt against your government, and
so exactly what happened with Ireland? That's not a revolution, that they had all this terrorism and they actually hurt a lot of British people in order to gain independence. That's something else. I'm trying to figure out how that isn't throwing off the British tyranny.
I think they won.
Self-responsibility and taking ownership of your own government. This guy, I mean, it's like he has his opinion. And then he just kind of blah, 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 blah.
Well, it's in a total denial, too, of every anti-colonial war that took place and like throughout history. And,
Big sigh from Doug. And his manner is so just, hey, what are you going to do? I'm the smartest guy in the room. I'm Israeli intelligence. I'm not going to back up that the British could crush you, but they could crush you. So what are you talking about? Like, he's so unconvincing.
Okay, if you think you can do it, I'm open to that argument. That's why I think it's a complex issue.
If you think you can do it, I guess you can talk about it. I'm open to it. Like, he's so
the point
negative.
is, and it's not even the point of like some future calculation or war game that he's got in his mind about how this would all play out.
Yeah.
The fact is, you have the right
to
protect yourself. That's all that matters. Full stop.
He's just so in the weeds of the practicality of whether or not it would work. And frankly, look at history. It does work. So, I mean, how do a people ever win against their powerful tyrant? That's never happened in history. My God.
And I don't think it's that important, because there's not going to be a revolution in America.
Also, it's not important.
Because there's not going to be a revolution in America. Okay.
It's not important.
There was no civil war.
It works in America though, because it's never.
Gun rights have worked in America because there's never been a dictatorship here.
It's obviously
Not because we have guns. That has nothing to do with it. Zero to do with it. Zero.
Zero.
He's the expert.
And America will fall under dictatorship in spite of all the arms, because the fact is, a lot of the people who've got a lot of guns are the ones who want dictatorship.
Oh, here we go. Here we go now, right?
Okay.
We
Interesting.
are going to have a dictatorship because, first of all,
The Cowboys want dictatorship.
right, the Cowboys want dictatorship.
They're the ones who want the dictators, not the left, not AOC.
You think
Yeah. So even if the right wins against the encroaching the current dictatorship of the left, we're just going to have another dictator. And as we talked about on our last show, funnily enough, that is a risk. Yes, sir, that is a risk. Anytime you cause chaos in society, including at the time of the American Revolution, where they offered the kingship to George Washington, this is a risk. And it's a risk we take because the tyrant we know, let's get rid of him. If they try to establish another one, we deal with it. And in the meantime, you work with trying to educate people about freedom. Come on, Yaron. This guy runs the Ayn Rand Institute. He runs it
Embarrassing.
intellectually and has for 2 decades.
Should not be allowed to speak.
own guns, you don't want a dictatorship? Quite the contrary. They want to just go out and slaughter the leftists so they can establish their own dictatorship. I mean,
Now-
What?
Can I,
Who-
do you know
who
anyone
wants
on the
that?
right who wants to slaughter the left?
To form their own dictatorship? Who's he referring to
I
here?
don't know a single speaker, commentator, politician, cultural influencer that has ever said that or anything like it. He's pulling that out of his ass, and he's getting it from leftist propaganda.
Yeah, that's
Which
AOC's talking point.
which
Domestic
makes him-
terrorism is on the right.
Yeah, and he soaks in it because he likes that, because he doesn't like people from Texas, which he has said.
there's no correspondence between people arming themselves and truly understanding and loving freedom. You know,
Oh, really?
so I don't. You know,
Should we hear that again?
There's no
What did he say?
correspondence between people owning.
so I don't. You know, correspondence between people arming themselves and truly understanding and loving freedom.
Okay, so according to Yaron's Platonic view of people truly understanding freedom and liberty, that doesn't, there's only 200 objectivists that agree with me in the world, and those are just 200 people that actually understand liberty and freedom.
You know, so I don't. You know, I don't. I mean, I have a gun because I want to defend myself. Not, you know, it's locked in a safe and I can't remember the combination, and I've even got a concealed weapons permit.
How American of him. He has a gun in case the cops take 5 minutes to get to his house, but it's in a safe, locked up, and he can't even remember the combination.
So I could walk around the streets in California with my gun on my belt.
How'd he get
but
that?
I
That's
never
hard to
have,
get.
because I find the whole idea so friggin'
Repugnant.
ridiculous, and
He finds the idea friggin' ridiculous, but really he's disgusted by it.
oppressive that I don't want to do it. But I have the
Protecting or
option,
defending
and I want
himself
that
is repulsive.
because there are people out there who want to kill me. But you look like, you know. Like me. No. Yeah, I was going to say, whoa. I didn't bring my weapon to Korea. No, there are people out there who want to kill me. I mean, whether they're complete nutcases. There's a guy who came knocking at the door, I'll end with this guy who came knocking at the door of the Ayn Rand Institute and said, you know, I really want to see Yaron Brook. And they said, why? He said, because the government's implanted a chip in his brain and I'm here to take it out.
Oh, come on.
Yeah. And he had a gun in his backpack, it turned out. So, you know, he obviously was mentally, you know, he landed up in a mental institution. It was problematic. But A, there are people like that. B, there are a bunch of Muslims who don't like me. And
Another good reason to own a gun.
You know, and so there are a lot of people who I offend.
There are crazy
And,
people. Like the
so
Texas
I want
shooter.
to be able to protect myself, but I am under no illusion that I am going to go and fight the American Special Forces. Again, as somebody.
I'll tell you what, the American Special Forces are overwhelmingly right. So I don't think he's going to have to fight Navy freaking SEALs.
No.
Something tells me they're going to switch, you know?
Yeah, no.
Being in the
He might be
military,
fighting
I know
BLM.
Right. And Antifa.
It's never good that
But if you look, never good that weapons are monopolized by the
It
state.
doesn't matter. You know, people make up these stories about all the guns were confiscated from the Jews in Germany, and that's why they were saying bullshit. It's a made-up story.
I think it happened in Cambodia and Russia.
It didn't happen anywhere.
What?
It's never been the case that authoritarianisms have risen to power because the civilians didn't have their handguns, particularly Jews. I mean, the Jews of Europe were not gonna fight, and when they did decide to fight, like in Warsaw, they found guns in order to fight. The fact that the Germans had taken their guns didn't stop them from rebelling in the rebellion of the Warsaw Ghetto. But the idea that the Germans, if the German Jews had just had their weapons, the Nazis would have spared them somehow is absurd.
No, but they could have fought for themselves, and they could have fought for they could have died rather than going to a concentration camp. And they could have taken some with them.
Yeah, they could have made it harder. And if you think about Warsaw, okay, maybe that's true. And I've often thought too, if they did disarm us, sure, at some point when you're at war, and we've seen this in history, that people with no guns have also overthrown a tyrant. And part of how they do that is they slowly gain weapons from, killing the tyrant's people or whatever and getting their weapons. So that can happen, but think of how much more effort and how much more death and destruction has to take place first before you get to that point.
Oh,
So, I mean, we're talking about lives of individuals,
I wonder why the Israelis government has weapons. Like, they can't defeat the United States. They can't defeat the Russians or the Chinese. So, like, why try? Why even have weapons? Why even have a handful of nuclear weapons? Why
isn't this a global policy where we just remove all weapons in every country? And I think that's what they're aiming for.
Because you can't win. I mean, why should any country have an army? Because you can't defeat the United States. Why should Pakistan have an army?
Maybe it would have cost the Nazis
Australia
a little bit more to kill them all. But it's doubtful that the German Jews would have ever used their weapons. I mean, they went to the concentration camps. They just walked in like sheep. Like sheep.
Wow.
I mean, believe me, these are my people. I've studied their history. They couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe it was happening to them, and they just walked in.
So he's like, they walked in like sheep, and therefore let's disarm everybody.
Therefore, there's no reason to ever own a gun because the Jews were sheep and they walked into concentration
camps. First
camps.
of all, he doesn't know if they'd had guns, that they would have been sheep. There's something about and by the way, in America, it's not just that we have guns. We have a culture of self-responsibility and get off my property and, don't tell me what to do. And
which is complementary to the gun.
That's
to owning
right.
a gun is the sense of private property ownership and get off my lawn.
That's right.
And the exact opposite of how he's portraying the Jews in Germany.
Nobody said,
which was that they were
if I
sheep.
had my gun, I would be, I'd be fighting. No.
Nobody said if I had my gun, I'd be
fighting. It took them years and years before they woke up to what the reality was. They realized how evil it was, and then they found guns and they rebelled. In a few isolated cases, most of them never did.
But you say North Koreans had the right to bear arms, would it still be a big debate?
Of course it would be. I mean, you think people want to be free. I don't.
What? You think people want to be free? I don't.
People are too stupid to be free, Doug.
Mm.
But you say North Koreans had the right to bear arms, would it still be a big debate?
Of course it would be. I mean, you think people want to be free. I don't. I don't think people want to be free. If people wanted to be free, why is it that 99.9% of human history we've been enslaved in one way or the other?
Which goes back to the ideas of having an idea.
It's about ideas. So there's no, this is my disagreement.
You don't need a gun. You need a book.
Just have the
All
idea.
you need is a book because mind and body are disconnected. Just read and understand things and get into the mind of, freedom and liberty.
And so all these millions
in terms of
American
having
gun
freedom and liberty, like by owning a gun and taking self-responsibility. No. You need ideas. You need a book. That's all you need.
All these millions of American gun owners that are ex-military and cowboys or regular rank and file Americans or whatever,
they don't
really understand. They don't understand it.
Well, his platonic idea of what that is, that a person understands freedom and liberty, I would argue this guy doesn't understand freedom and liberty. He thinks it's an abstract idea, and that's all it is. He doesn't know that it's a reality. It's a psychological demand. If you don't have that in you to go, F you, you're not going to be free. And he's right. A lot of people don't want to be free, and they're scared and terrified, and they want the government to take care of them. But there's a lot of people who don't. But he dismisses all of those people, which he did earlier, as wanting a dictatorship. He thinks everyone on the right that wants freedom and liberty doesn't get it and actually wants a dictator.
With George W. Bush, when he said all people yearn, for freedom when he invaded Iraq or whatever. But it's nonsense. Most people don't yearn for freedom.
Maybe we should let millions of them come into our country.
Yeah.
Who don't understand freedom.
This is an open
and don't
borders
want
guy.
freedom.
This is the open borders guy that says all these people yearn
guy.
for freedom, so they come to America.
Yeah. I mean, he's right that you can't go to Iraq and put in a constitution and magically your people are going to want
100%
freedom.
agree with that.
He's right about that. But that has been an argument that us people for regulated immigration have been making for years, that he's poo-pooed and called us xenophobes.
Yeah, because we're the ones
told what to do.
People want
and
to
they
be
have
told what
to
to do.
gain the right ideas in order to realize that that's wrong and that they could live a much better life if only they could live it for themselves.
But if
That's
you
why we
import
should have
them and you
immigrants,
put
right?
them on the magic dirt of America, they suddenly will understand it. Oh, except unless they're in Texas, then they really won't get it because Texans just want a dictatorship.
But that's an achievement. Freedom is a massive achievement. It's an achievement
Right.
at the individual level.
That's right.
And it's
That's
still an
right.
achievement at the cultural level. And this way, I mean, how long is
That's why you don't
But-
let millions of immigrants in.
And this is why guns is part of that achievement. Owning a gun and taking responsibility for your own life and your family and your community and your own freedom is achieving freedom. That's how you do it. I'm not sure how he expects it to actually happen. He says we need like a freaking book and it'll just magically happen. But what are the actual physical realities of a person achieving freedom? I mean, what? He doesn't even think about that.
Yeah, here's my property, here's my land, I'm going to defend
very
it.
long, right? So, and most of the world is very, very young to freedom because it's such a massive, massive achievement. An achievement that
agree
was
with that.
made
I agree with that.
intellectually in Europe based on Greek ideas.
I suppose freedom is just, it only depends on your ability to.
So now this guy's saying, okay, so what you're saying, Yaron, is it really just depends on your ability to defend freedom.
defend it.
Yes, but not with weapons.
What? Not with weapons?
Your own liberty and freedom depends on your ability to defend it, but not in reality, not with weapons.
Oh, intellectually.
Get it?
Okay.
Get it?
Depends on your ability to defend it intellectually. Intellectually. The Russians couldn't defend their freedom
Mind,
intellectually.
body.
I mean, the rationalist.
How about both?
Rationalist
have
says
both?
what? Rationalist says what? Come on.
How about you defend it intellectually and you get a gun?
You
We
need
have
both.
both?
You need both.
Jesus Christ.
I mean,
Communists
Did Thomas
were the
Jefferson
smallest
have a gun?
minorities with no weapons, and they took over a massive government and crushed them because there was no intellectual opposition to them. The Khmer Rouge in Cambodia were tiny.
doesn't this argue against his earlier point that you can't defeat a tyrant with force?
Yeah,
because they're more powerful than you. And now he's saying groups with just the right ideas crushed the most powerful tyrant. Like he's completely contradicting himself.
Right. Because if, theoretically, if a majority of people had guns, they could have fought against this tiny minority of people
let me
who had
ask,
bad ideas.
Did they have guns? Did they have knives? Did they have
I think the Khmer
rocks?
Rouge had guns.
Did they
when they
have
shot 3 million
Molotov
people.
cocktails? I mean, I don't care what the weapon is. If you want to be free and you're living under a tyrant, you have to go to war against them physically, violently, somehow. So how is he disconnecting that from earlier? He said it's impossible. You can't win against the United States. You can't, he's made the argument that if the tyrant is more powerful than you, you're screwed. But now he's bringing up historical examples where that isn't true. So he's so disintegrated, Doug.
A little minority with no weapons, and they took over the country through ideas, without a shot fired.
How do you do that?
I think the Khmer Rouge killed millions of people.
If we
and
all
I don't
just
think they did it with ideas. They did it with guns.
If we just sit around in cafes with Ayn Rand's pamphlet on man's rights, we win, man.
That's all you got to do.
Jesus.
And most of these revolutions happened with no shots fired.
That is bullshit.
It's not about weapons. It's not about
the Russian Revolution, the Chinese
Hitler
Revolution,
didn't come to power
the Cambodian Revolution, North Korea, Vietnam, Cuba.
Yeah, not violent at all, Doug. The dictator went, "Oh, gee, I'm really sorry. There seem to be a lot of you. I think we'll just here's the keys to the buildings. Our bad."
You have great ideas.
He got people to vote for him.
Take the castle.
And then the army initially was opposed to him, and then he convinced them to.
Whoa, your ideas, man.
Whoa, dude, this is crazy, man.
I didn't know.
For him. So they all joined the Nazi Party. Not because Hitler was powerful. Nazi Party was a tiny little minority. Nobody cared about the Nazis. They could have wiped them out within days. Revolutions don't happen because people with big guns show up and take over a country. People with little guns and big ideas. It's all about ideas. It's not about guns. That's why I don't think it matters.
That's why I'm against the Second Amendment.
One way or the other, whether the American people are armed or not.
He says it doesn't matter one way or another. Okay, fine. But that's not what he's saying. He's saying you shouldn't be allowed to have guns. That's what he said.
Bad ideas, we'll get a dictatorship. If they have good ideas, we'll remain free. And guns don't matter one way or the other.
Bullshit. I mean, there's a kernel of truth in that ideas, of course, matter. But yeah. He's entertaining a false alternative that you either have all ideas or all guns. It's a combination. You need to defend yourself intellectually. If we had a great culture, we would still have guns because there are crazy people and there are bad people and bad ideas and bad militaries that want to try and kill you. I mean, why he wants to just throw out the entire idea that we should defend ourselves or that any freedom-loving person would want to defend themselves physically. Yeah. And that's crazy.
Or that you have to, I mean, I just don't know how you, first of all, it's a deterrent, but second of all, and by being a deterrent, we're talking about individual lives of people who will be killed by the government if they can't protect themselves against the government. So, like a civil war might take 6 years and a lot more deaths if the people aren't, but that's no big deal. So give up your guns. Who cares?
You can't win.
You can't win. And if you can, you don't need your guns anyway. It'll take longer. Half of you will die, but you can get it done. It's like he's playing a chessboard rather than.
Yeah, it's very rationalistic. It's ideas divorced from reality rather than saying, hey, let's have great ideas about what freedom really means and really arm ourselves and get millions and millions of like-minded people that love freedom and liberty and individual rights. And we're going to all arm ourselves so that no one can ever defeat us physically or take our land or take our property or destroy our communities. Why not do it? Let's start with that and then go up and say, okay, if that's the case, how do we develop a government or a movement that can win and to preserve our freedom and preserve our happiness? You don't start with, you can't win. I mean, it's such a backwards, twisted way of thinking. I can't even comprehend it.
So really he's against it because it's impractical. It's just, and he calls a lot of people who don't agree with him pragmatists. But I don't
That's his
agree
whole
that
argument.
I don't agree it's not practical, first of all. And I think history bears that out. And each individual life that can be saved as you're overthrowing tyranny matters. We're talking about people.
Right.
So if it's quicker and shorter when we have to go violent, that's better. And it deters them from even messing with us. So we might not even have to get to that point. So I think it's just the practicality of it aside, though, it is an inalienable right because we have a man qua man needs to be able to protect himself.
Well,
and
that's
yeah.
One of the precepts of objectivism is that the moral is the practical. And so if it's true that it's moral to defend yourself and act to preserve and defend your own life, then in practice, yes, you can be defeated by a huge gang of really bad people. But it's also the case that I rather die fighting.
Give me liberty or give me death.
And we have no chance if we have no weapons. We have some chance if we have some weapons. So to say, well, you have no chance, you have a smaller chance, therefore don't have weapons.
Or if you do win, you're just going to have a dictatorship anyway, because Americans are they don't understand liberty and freedom like I do. I'm not an American. I'm this globalist globetrotter who was in the Israeli military for 2 years, and therefore I know.
Let me tell you Americans how to defend your liberty.
I was looking for this quote, which I'll share another time, but I was reading it a couple of days ago and I should have saved it. But he had this quote someone sent to me. He doesn't have, listen, a lot of objectivists are sick of this guy. He runs the Institute. He's chairman now. I think there's another guy CEO, but ideologically, this is the kind of crap that Yaron spouts on a daily basis.
Oh yeah, this is scratching the surface.
And one of the things he said on a show not that long ago was how he would never want to live around people from Texas. They're all bigots. They're all misogynists. He had this paintbrush of what Texans are like and doesn't like them. They're all kind of macho or, he doesn't like that culture at all. I think he really looks down on, and there are many, many examples, which will, he is. There are many examples over the years that I've noticed, even when he's talking about Muslims and, a group that he sort of agrees shouldn't be immigrating here in mass quantities. This especially was back when we were having a lot of terrorist attacks. I did a show talking about his take on Muslim immigration, and his whole take was so anti-American. And his take on immigration is immigrants are better than Americans. So we should open the door and let as many in as possible, because Americans don't love freedom. They don't like liberty. They're idiots. They're uneducated. He really looks down on Americans. And he said there are a lot of statements where he's contemptuous of Americans and American culture. And I think he doesn't like gun culture either.
Well,
I don't even like calling it gun culture. It's self-responsibility culture.
No, it's a typical charge of leftist coastal elites is that the ordinary sort of flyover state American is a rube.
Yeah.
Is an uneducated moron, a flag waving NASCAR, watching gun toting rube or something, which is my experience is the exact opposite. The fools, the morons, the unproductive, and the destroyers in our world are these coastal elites that do absolutely nothing but bloviate and argue for the end of American civilization. The real Americans are the gun-toting, country music listening, NASCAR watching Americans in the flyover states. Those are the real Americans. Those are the productive people. Those are the most intelligent people I've ever met. They're practical.
They have a lot of common sense.
And they love freedom and they'll fight for it.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's end on that note. That was our first Objectivist Report. I hope you guys liked it. Let us know in the comments. Maybe if, send me stuff. If you see stuff that you feel like is particularly that you want us to comment on, we're going to probably do one each episode because they're kind of fun. I think it's good. It's good philosophic detection anyway. All right. So that's it for our show. We'll see you next time, hopefully next week. And thanks for joining us. And stay safe, protect yourself. Right? Thanks, everybody.
It doesn't matter. You'll be crushed. Don't even try.
Don't bother.
It's filled with satire and fun. It's been the demise of bad ideas, and we'll know what's right when she's done. So download this free podcast now and give perspectives you may lack. It's concise and right and achieves world peace, guaranteed all your money back. Last time, ready?